Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Side Hustles and Stuff podcast, episode 9. My name is Yuriy and I'm joined by Keishi.
Hey Yuri, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Not bad, not bad. What are you drinking today? I'll ask your question
Okay.
for you.
I have Fire One Day Black. It's a coffee. It's a big bottle. And the other thing is I have Georgia Latte Nista Cafe Latte. I don't know why I bought this. I'm not a fan of like mixed coffee. I just take coffee plain. So I guess this is me trying out new things from the vending machine downstairs. So this episode is brought to you in part by the vending machine downstairs. What about you?
That's great. Yeah, just water and tea as usual. Simple man.
Well, it's water and tea is good enough. On the other hand, I am overclocking my body by consuming all this caffeine.
Well, so you got to drop a lot of value today in that case.
Wow. I'm psyched. I'm pumped and ready to knock out some crazy content to deliver value.
That's awesome.
Guys, today we're going to do something a little bit different. This is more of a freestyle episode where we're going to run through a myriad of topics and simply discuss what's new. And we're just going to chat about our own side hustles, our goals, what we're doing. So I guess, Keishi, one thing I kind of want to say about this episode is that it's always nice to sit in and talk to people that are kind of doing the same things that you're doing, not in like a structured fashion, but generally just vibe with them. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's like a difference between reading like a how-to book and like a biography. Essentially, where the first one you just get kind of the essentials of whatever you should be doing, whereas the second one is just kind of fun to read and you get to be immersed in the story. And I think it's fun listening in on other people's conversations like this because you can always pick up something new, learn something new, and you can also see how other people are doing their things.
You know, there are certain genres of movies or music that I would watch or listen to if I want to get into a certain mood. For example, today I was thinking earlier about, what kind of content we consume. I guess this goes back to that time we talked about rom-coms. In the spirit of side hustles, like I really like Jay-Z's earlier work. I don't know if you listen to much of him.
Not beyond the Empire State of Mind.
But his early work, like, for example, Reasonable Doubt, Life and Times with Sean Carter, Volume 3, a lot of songs are actually quite entrepreneurial. It's a nice kind of thing to surround yourself with if you want to get into a certain mood. So I guess that's why today we're just jumping in and we're going to freestyle. And I think the first thing is, let's talk goals. I know last time we promised, I promised some audacious goals for June 2020.
Yeah, I think I'm just reading yours from last month. You wanted to finish a bunch of Amazon articles for a blog, redo your email opt-in bonus, and create a video for, I guess, like a comedy skit or something. So where are you standing on those?
All right, so I only did I did 2 articles. One is unrelated, so that's as far as I went. Basically, I overpromised and I underdelivered because, last time we were talking about goals, I'm like, oh yeah, I could not easily do that. And maybe at some point I can, but I definitely overpromised. Like how I see this with language learners, and when they set themselves goals, they're like, all right, when can I study language? They usually look at their schedule. And for example, they'll notice that they wake up 8 o'clock. So if they wake up at 7 o'clock, they could easily create that hour for language learning, except it doesn't really work that way. Because it's like, 1, language learning is a new routine in itself. 2, there's also the new routine of waking up early. That's number 2. Number 3, waking up early means you got to go to sleep early. If you don't go to sleep early, you're going to really mess up your next morning. Then there's the, you can wake up at 7 a.m., but are you really going to wake up at 7 a.m.? Like you could lie in bed there, like moaning in pain. And like, for example, in my case, if I wake up, like it takes me a good 10 to 15 minutes to just like be alert and coherent, or alert and aware. So it's,
I think that's still pretty fast.
Yeah. And so I think most people approach it that way, and I made that same beginner's mistake. I was like, oh yeah, I can totally do this. And there was a time I probably could, but I simply did not.
It's interesting that you bring that up because recently I read Atomic Habits, which a book by James Clear, and he talks a lot. It's essentially about how habits are formed and like how to kind of stack habits together and things like that. And like when you read it, you realize that exactly like you just explained. It's like if you want to study whatever, if you want to study Spanish, and you say to yourself, okay, I'm going to study from 7 a.m. every morning because normally I wake up at 8, so I just have to wake up an hour earlier. Like there's just this whole series of things that you have to change one by one, essentially. It's not like like you just said, it's not like you decide you're going to wake up at 7. Like first you got to decide that you're going to go to sleep at 8 instead of 9 or at 9 instead of 10. And then you got to decide, okay, so what about that 1 hour that I lose at the end of the day? And like it's a whole series of things where like even turning the wrong way in one of those can just get you completely off the path that you were aiming for.
Yeah. So it's I guess it's a lot more complex than it seems to be. Like everyone can say, oh yeah, sure, I can wake up an hour earlier. But will you? Can you? And more importantly, can you do it consistently?
Yeah, I think that last thing is the most important one. It's easy to be pumped about doing something and like wake up at 7 a.m. like 3 days in a row. Like one time in the past, for some reason I wanted to learn how to program apps for like mobile phones, and I just got into it so much that I was up until like 3 a.m. and I was trying things and playing around, and then I went to sleep. But I was like, okay, I'm gonna wake up at 7 and continue. And I woke up at 7, and then I spent another day, and then I think the only thing that I gotta say is that I have no idea how to program apps for mobile phones.
Like it's not sustainable, is it?
Exactly, it's not sustainable.
Yeah. So that's the long story short with my goals. Yeah, I overshot. It's that whole beginner's like confidence. Oh yeah, I can knock that out. The lesson here for me is and I think anyone else can take away is like when you kind of fail at a goal, most people try to punish themselves by doubling up. School would do that if you miss a homework. Now you got to do 2 homeworks plus the penalty or whatever. But I think the better thing to do here is to scale down.
Yeah, I think that's right. And let me ask you this: like, if you haven't set that goal last month, would you still have done as much as you have done?
I don't know. That's a good question. For argument's sake, I would say I would have done less because the whole point of a goal is that it gives you a direction to walk in, and how far you choose to walk is kind of your you set that goal, I'll walk that far, but like you may not reach that far, but the whole point is you made strides in that particular direction.
Goals are never something that gets somebody to a point, but it's like setting the destination on your Google Maps, right? Unless you type in that I want to go to this store and then follow the path, then you're just kind of aimlessly wandering around. So I think even if you don't necessarily hit your goals, it's still probably good to kind of have them at the back of your mind, because they're just kind of like this guiding star in a way, right?
They're always gonna be there in the back of your mind, nagging you.
Yeah, exactly. And then I think it's just calibrating it to kind of figure out how it fits into your overall schedule, and like how not to make them too ambitious, but at the same time, like I think it can go either way. Like if you set your goals too high, then you can kind of get demotivated because you can never hit them. But at the same time, if you set them too easy, then you just stop even setting them because you just keep hitting them consistently, and it's not challenging you at all.
Yeah, or they're so easy that you're not exactly pushing the needle, and you're just like still floating around in the shallow pool instead of actually swimming into the deep end.
Yeah, exactly. Then you're just checking off boxes in like your to-do app.
Yeah.
And that's something that I was kind of not sure struggling is the right word, but like to what sort of granularity do you put your tasks in your to-do list? Like, is paying a bill a task, or is writing an article a task, or should writing a paragraph be a task? Because again, I think if you start doing like a to-do list sort of thing, and you start checking things off, then you can sort of start putting things on the list just for the sake of being able to check them off. Even like you said, they don't necessarily move the needle.
So how about you? How were your goals?
So what did I say? I said keep posting a post every weekday on the site that I'm trying to grow right now, and then get at least 50% done with content for a site that I plan to launch in mid-July with 30 articles, and then find at least new find at least one new regular writer for my sites. So the first one I hit, and actually I increased the posting frequency to 7 times a day. Not 7 times a day. That would be stretching myself, but 7 times a week. So twice every Tuesday and Thursday, essentially, just for the sake of consistency. Mm-hmm. And then the second one, I got up to like 10 articles or something. So I was planning to have 15, but I only got to probably 10. And but the good thing is I was able to find a couple new writers for both of the sites that the site that I'm growing right now actively, and the site that I'm kind of trying to launch in a month or so. And so with that, it's just a matter of assigning them the articles and getting them written. So I'm pretty sure I can, if not by July 15th, which was the original plan, then I'm sure I can get the site launched by like end of July or something. So yeah, I'd say about 70% of what I said I'd do, I probably did.
Good. Yeah, I'm the underachiever here.
I'm trying.
All right, so goals aside, next up, what kind of books have you been reading?
What have I been reading? Oh yeah, I was mainly reading Warren Buffett's The Snowball for like the last probably 10 days or so. And like we chatted about this a couple times, but it's like 700 pages in like font 9 or font 10. It's probably the longest book I ever read.
Wait, so by font, in 10 size font, you mean extremely small?
Yeah, exactly. It's smaller font than most books that I've read, I think. And the volume's just immense. But then again, I mean, he's at the end of the book, he's like 80 or something, and he's had 60 successful years behind him. So yeah, it's probably pretty hard to compress it into a shorter book if you're talking about a biography. Yeah.
So how'd you like the book?
Yeah, so it was really good. I think he's a really like a unique person, because when you look at the richest people in the world, like the top 10, top 20 or whatever, I think most of them have built companies in kind of the true sense of the word. So they've built Facebook, or they've built Microsoft, or they've built whatever, IKEA or something, like a company that creates products or sells services, or mostly that has products. But in Buffett's case, essentially what he did was just he kind of traded his way up, right? He bought a part of business, then he sold that. He bought a bigger business, he sold that, and then that business made him money, and then he sold the business and bought another one, and it's like a really interesting case, I think, that just goes to show how compounding works. Because like Buffett was not one of the richest persons in the world for a long time, and like now he's worth like $80 billion or something. Yeah. But just like 10 years ago or something, he was not worth even half of that probably. So it just goes on to show that like the longer you stick at it, the faster it will grow, essentially, if you do things right.
Yeah. Is he still number one?
That's one. No, I think he's definitely not number one. That's Bezos, right? But let's see, probably like in the top 5 or something.
We should probably do a separate episode on compounding, because it's one of these really vague notions that you don't get until you start seeing it in action.
Yeah, it's because it's hard. I was just looking at the P&L for the website that I'm kind of trying to build right now, and like I was just wondering how many people would have quit after like 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, because I was looking at the numbers and it's like 0, 0, 0, 0.
Yeah.
And then maybe it's like 50, and then it's like 10, and then it's like 100, and then suddenly it's 500, and it's 1,000, and it's 1,500. So it's essentially just delaying gratification, or whatever you would call it, right? It's like nothing for a long time, but as long as you believe in what you're doing, and as long as you believe that somewhere it's compounding, and at one point or another it will explode, then you just got to keep pushing through, I think. He's number 4, by the way.
Oh, wow. Okay.
$67.5 billion. He's still doing pretty well.
Oh, it's not so bad. Not bad at all, Mr. Buffett.
Yeah, but it's amazing what he's done. I think it's yeah, it's a really great book and recommend reading it.
Really surprised that you knocked out a 700-page book in like what span of 10, 11 days.
I was reading like 2 hours a day, like hour a day, 2 hours a day.
That is
in the
work.
morning, in the evening, in the afternoon.
Well, then again, like I also plowed through the Elon Musk book in similar fashion, although that one is a lot shorter.
Yeah, it's like one third of it. That was a really great book too, and I think Elon's a really admirable.
Yeah,
person.
I did consider him like when we were talking about our best books at one point, but like there was just not enough kind of for me to grasp onto. I don't know. For some reason, it was a good book. Like I admire people that get a lot of things done, but for some reason, it never made my top 10.
Yeah, and I think he's got a really interesting life, right? And he's doing so many different cool things. And I'm just looking at the list of like top 10 richest people in the world or whatever this is, and like they're all cool, but I think nobody has as interesting life as like Elon Musk or like Richard Branson.
Yeah.
So I think more money is definitely good in itself, but there are so many more dimensions to it than just being the richest in the world.
Exactly. I like Richard Branson for that reason, because the guy genuinely seems to have fun in life and work, whereas everyone else is kind of very focused and intense. Richard Branson is like, he's just floating through and getting things done.
Yeah, exactly. It's like he's just having fun and just happens to be making money along the way, versus like the typical hustle and sacrifice fun, sacrifice life to make money sort of philosophy. Again, I don't think it's like Richard Branson never worked hard or never had difficult days in his life or anything. I'm sure he had a lot of struggles, and he had to do like all-nighters a lot of times and things like that. But kind of when you look at it overall, I think at least from like a point of view of outsider like me, it just seems like he's had a hell of a lot of more fun than Larry Ellison
Steve Jobs or
like
Zuckerberg,
Steve Jobs.
Because you recommended the Richard Branson books to me. I read, I think, 3 of them. And like, there was one, I remember he got arrested for smuggling CDs, was it? Across the border? Like,
yeah, he figured out like a loophole.
He got arrested.
Just to give the listeners, just to give the listeners the story. Essentially, what you could do before was you could take CDs out of the UK and sell them abroad, and if you did that, you didn't have to pay the consumption tax or something within the UK. But what he figured out was that he could take the CDs through the customs, but never actually board the ferry and just take them back into his warehouse. And he started exploiting that until they caught onto his little trick, and
he got arrested for it.
He got into some trouble.
He also did hot air balloon trips, boat trips. There's a lot. His book just has a lot of stuff in there.
Yeah, it's like it's half entrepreneurship book and it's like half adventure book. Like he did his trips around the world in balloon where he almost died of her.
I think there was one part where he was flying over a certain country where they needed permission from the military, otherwise they would shoot him down. And he had it. He called it in last minute and he got permission. I think, was it Egypt?
Yeah, it was Egypt or Morocco or something. It was around there, and it was a great story. It's just.
So how does Warren Buffett compare? Like, what are you getting out of the book? What did you get?
Like, one of his main philosophies sort of seemed to be to use what he called float. So like when you buy an insurance company, you have so many, or you have so much money in your bank that's not really your money, right? Because everybody pays you premium in advance so that you can pay them back in the future. And what he would do is just take advantage of that, because essentially you're just managing that money, and whatever interest you make on that money or whatever profit you make on that money, you get to keep, right? So unless something really bad happens, but let's say you're running an insurance company insuring against coronavirus, and everybody pays you like $100, then you get to keep those $100 until you have to pay them back. So you get to essentially use that capital to make money for yourself while you hold that money for other people. So I think in essence he's a banker, right?
Yeah.
So that's one. the other thing that I found interesting was that like at first he started looking for businesses that were really discounted and like really cheap, that were really distressed, and then he would either try to turn them around or just sell them off in parts and things like that. Whereas later on he switched his focus to looking for things that were really valuable but that still weren't that weren't trading at the price that he thought that was their kind of intrinsic value, right? So he kind of went from buying what he called the cigarette buffs. Is that what you call them, like the little pieces? Yeah, to like actually buying solid businesses. So that was kind of interesting to see his shift in strategy. But there was a lot of good stuff in there. It's the kind of book where I've never read a book that's this long, and at first it was kind of hard to get into it, and then the further you get along, the more you want to know what's happening next. So it's like once it captures you, it's not going to let you go until you finish the book.
Has it put any thoughts into your head of something that you should do, or it's still marinating in your brain?
Yeah, I think nothing necessarily that's kind of actionable in the short term or whatever. But like the other thing he talks about a lot in the book is the Ovarian lottery. So essentially, like just by the fact that he was born in the U.S. in the 1930s or whatever, like half of the game was already won for him. And like I think that's what a lot of people fail to understand is just like you can be as smart as you want as long as you're born somewhere where there's no electricity and where you have no access to the internet, to put it in kind of nowadays terms. Then you can be as smart as you want. The chances are that you're not going to get out of that village, that you're going to be living in that village and that your kids are going to be living in that village, right? Whereas like when he was born, like the economy was just starting to be rebuilt, and like it was the right time, and there is such a thing as right time, right?
Oh, so, timing, as much as we hate to admit it, there are unfortunately right times for things. Yeah. As much as I hate to
admit it. I think that, exactly. And I think that kind of comes back to like when you compare yourself with somebody, I think it's always good to compare yourself with somebody that started where you started versus comparing yourself with somebody completely different. Like if you compare yourself with like a Ivy League school graduate or somebody, then it's not really fair comparison, right? And we'd like to believe it's all equal, but unfortunately it's not. So
the mention of the Ovarian lottery and where exactly he was born and under which circumstances, a lot of people kind of miss that point. Like there is like that strong belief of like you can get anything done. You can, if you set your mind to it, you can achieve pretty much anything, but you can't front on the fact that just being born in the right place, in the right background, and with the right family just gives you a massive step up. In some places, you don't even have that. You're not even born on an equal level. You're born in like in the negative, and you have to. And it's a lot harder because like I speak of this from an immigrant's perspective, because I came to the U.S. when I was a kid, and I don't know how I could imagine life if I was back in Ukraine or Russia or wherever the hell I'm from, somewhere around that region. But all of that was outside of my control, and it was just pure luck,
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's like a sort of a survivorship bias in there where people that make it tend to say that they did it all by themselves and that everybody can do it. And like, if I can do it, everyone can do it sort of thing. Whereas at the other end of the spectrum, like I think people understand that there are some parts that are just out of your control. Like no matter how hard you work, like at some point work becomes disproportionate to the amount of income you make or to sort of the position you get to in life.
There's no self-made man. Every time I hear someone saying, oh, so-and-so is self-made, it's a very, very, very narrow viewpoint of actually what happened, because no one's really self-made. Like if you succeed in business, it's probably because someone gave you a chance or two. And by that logic alone, by that argument alone, you're not self-made.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you just look at it from the point of view of stuff that we talk about a lot, it's like, let's say somebody builds a blog that makes $30,000 a month or something, and that's pretty successful, right? But and they're like, oh, I built it by myself and I'm self-made. But at the end of the day, if the blog's monetized by Amazon or if the blog's monetized by display ads, then there's just so many different people that are behind your success, even though you don't necessarily interact with them directly. But like nothing can happen in a vacuum. You can't build anything in a vacuum, right?
Exactly. And the affiliate program may as well shut you down, and they still kind of, so there is someone there to dictate your success to some extent.
Yeah, exactly. Unless you're like truly financially independent, but that's like 0.1% of this.
The more I think about it, like, yeah, but the world is kind of very much interrelated. I really go against the notion of self-made man, or I did it all myself. Like in the case of the blog, sure, there's the affiliate program that accepted you, but there's also you, right? For example, the person that you decided to do the side hustle. This idea was not implanted. This was not your idea. You weren't born thinking, all right, this is what I'm going to get done. Someone else also played a hand in developing you in the way that you are today, whether it's your parents or outside influences like teachers or books. You can't argue that you're self-made because, if you didn't have the luck of being raised that way or coming across that book, you wouldn't be thinking about this right now.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the one thing that what a lot of people mean, I think, when they say self-made, is just that the person had the drive to actually capture the opportunity. Because I think there's a big difference between starting in the same place and ending in the same place, right? Because like, let's say somebody was in the exact same situation as you, but they just didn't care enough or whatever. I think they wouldn't, for example, have a successful site, or they wouldn't live in Japan and things like that. I think so it comes down to how motivated a person is and how much drive he has, but it can't exist in a vacuum, right?
Yeah.
There just has to be a whole system and an environment around him, around her.
And a system or an environment where you have the freedom to think about these things because you're not worried about other things. I imagine anyone else in like living in a war-torn country or that have like more pressing needs that are sitting on their mind, a side hustle isn't the first thing they think about. There's an interesting article I read many years ago, and it still kind of resonates with me to this day, is on the topic of poverty and IQ. Every now and then you'll hear an argument saying, oh, the poor stay poor because of the decisions that they make. But the decisions that they make are like, their decisions involve, how do I put food on the table? How do I pay these bills? And how do I make sure my kids are fed? And how do I make sure that I walk down the street and get, so-and-so safely without getting jumped, for example? There's a lot of everyday stresses that weigh upon a person's mind. And when you are weighed down by these things, you can argue all you want that everyone has the freedom and a choice, and if they think about it, they'll do it. But if you have these pressing needs that are clouding your brain, there's no way in hell that you're going to go inside, start a side hustle.
Yeah, exactly. And a while back, I wrote an article on my personal blog that I called, I think, life equals maintenance plus consumption plus creativity. And I think that kind of just talks about what you did. And I think like everybody just at first has to just do the maintenance, right? You have to earn enough to be able to afford a place to live, or you have to spend enough time walking to the well so that you can get water to get drinks for your family and to get your family fed. And like only once you meet that, then you can either consume some extra stuff or you can spend your time creating. But in either case, unless you meet your basic needs, then you really don't have time to worry about even watching Netflix or about making a side hustle or building a business or whatever.
Yeah.
Now that said, I think if you have time to watch Netflix, then you definitely have time to start a side hustle. So I think that's where it gets kind of tricky, because I think a lot of people spend 3-4 hours a day watching Netflix, and then they complain they're not making enough money. Whereas if they just cut their Netflix in half and then they started doing something, then they could probably build a site or build a business or something.
Do you know any people like that?
Nobody particular comes to my mind right now, but I think just kind of the general sentiment among people.
Okay, because I've actually never met anyone who complained about their income and watched, or complained about not reaching their goals and then watched Netflix.
Like what I hear a lot is people in Slovakia complaining about how much money they make, right? Just by reading like some comments on Facebook and stuff like that on different articles. The country I'm from, just for those of you who don't know.
Eastern European represent, Slavic nation. Everybody do the Slavic squat.
Yeah, we plan to name this podcast the Slav Hassle first.
Yeah. We got to do a image of both of us doing the Slavic squat, which is the Western, I guess you could say, cousin of the Asian squat.
I gotta Google that. Slavic.
It's just a bunch of guys in Adidas pants and leather jackets sitting around.
It's the cool guys.
It's the gopniks, the hooligans. They're sitting around in squat position, drinking alcohol.
But you see people that are complaining about like, oh, I only make however many euros, and I think for many it's really difficult. Like especially if you already have your family and if you lived like for a long time the way you've been living and like everything was good and then suddenly turned bad or whatever. But I think if you're young and if you complain, then if you just channel that complaining energy into learning something, then I think you'd just be able to solve your problem. But again, it's easy to talk about these things, but it's not that easy to execute them and to implement them.
I think this can definitely lead into another topic, like a really complex topic on motivation and kind of self-awareness, you could say. For example, because of gym, right? I'll get a lot of comments from people saying, oh, you go so much. Oh, I wish I could go. I wish I had your motivation. But they don't. I think like it's very easy to look at these things and be like, well, listen, you just go. That's it. It's a black and white go. But it's kind of like going back to the language learning example, you know, it's not exactly easy at that point because now it kind of requires to reshuffle their life that they're so used to. So that's one kind of a issue. The other, like, so there's the current pressures of everyday life, right? And your daily routine that you're really used to and things that you're willing to give up and you're not willing to give up. And I think there's also where the person is mentally is also very important, because if a person has something more serious on their mind or ongoing issues that they've never addressed, you can almost quite easily see why they haven't done anything, because they have unresolved issues that they need to attend to first. For example, you know, if you have anxiety, if you have depression that you haven't unresolved, or if you have like an internal conflict, or if you have trouble at home, I think the more a person has on their mind, the less likely, well, not the less likely, but they don't have a lot of mental clarity and they're bogged down. I remember one conversation with a friend, and we were just talking about our families. He was telling me about his, and I'm not going to name the friend, and I don't think he listens to the podcast, so I hope it's okay. But basically, you know, it's also like me, like a single mom household, divorced parents, and I think he has a bit of a chip on his shoulder because of that. And as a result, like, you know, he drinks a lot more. It can be quite easy to see how someone ends up slipping down a slippery slope because of simply all the stuff that they have to deal with, or simply that they've not addressed, and it simply makes other things a lot harder.
Yeah, I think that's a great example, and I think it's a good point, because one thing is having the time, and I think the other thing is having the kind of mental bandwidth. And I think sometimes it can be hard to imagine. Like, luckily, I never had to deal with this to any large extent or anything, but I can assume that a lot of people that want to start a side hustle, for example, like they know that they have 2 hours after their work every day, but they just go to their work and it's so draining on them that when they get home, all they want to do is just watch Netflix or just do nothing and sit around.
Yeah.
And it's easy to go and say, oh, hey, you have 2 hours where you're doing nothing and you should be starting a side hustle or something. But then again, those 2 hours are probably like a regeneration time for them, or they just don't have the mental energy to do something creative or to do something where it's not just sitting back and consuming.
Yeah. So to that extent, I think it's not exactly, it's not simple. I think there's a lot of house cleaning that needs to be done. A lot of basic life necessities have to be checked off. You know, as we talked about, in the case of poverty, there's much more pressing needs than starting a side hustle. You know, that's like making sure that your bills are paid, making sure that, you know, your kids are fed, making sure that your environment is safe, trying to earn off of your first income before trying to build a side hustle. So there's that. And the next step is, I think there's also the mental side of things. You know, like if you have issues weighing you down, that'll definitely interfere with your work and anything that you ever want to do in life. On top of that, you also have to be kind of aware. Like, for example, what I mean by that is all of us think that we are quite smart and rational and we make the best decisions. But I don't think, which kind of means that we're more so not aware of what we actually are and where we are, because that's just, like the Dunning-Kruger effect. That's just a giant guess. And to that extent, I don't think one could be aware of himself and the mistakes he's making and the framework through which he's thinking, because it's just that hard. You can't see yourself until you step out of yourself. The only reason I say this is that I used to read a lot, right? And a lot of philosophy and, like a lot of great stories. And then I kind of took a look at my own relationships and whatnot. And it kind of hit me. It's like, how was I reading all these books and quoting all this stuff and generally sounding smart and being impressed with myself? Yet here I was being a complete idiot in the case of personal relationships. And then it kind of hit me like, clearly something's wrong. Clearly I'm not as smart as I thought I was. In fact, I'm pretty dumb. And I think to some extent, that's a life-changing paradigm, because you're taking who you are as a person, completely twisting it upside down, because no one wants to think they're dumb. Everyone wants to think that they're made rational decisions and they all rationalize things for it. I'm just tying this back to the point of like, you have to be aware of how off you really are. And that's a very hard step to make, I think. It probably doesn't happen without outside help.
Yeah, I think so. And I think you see a lot of people that are successful in business going into politics, or the other way around, or just generally somebody that's successful in one industry goes into another industry and things like that. And it's like what do they call it? Like the God complex or something, where like you succeed in one thing and you think you'll be successful in everything, or did you know everything? Yeah. And I think sometimes it can be hard to admit you don't know something. But again, I think as long as you're confident in whatever is your main thing that you can do it, then like I think the less you know, the more you have to learn. So the more fun life becomes almost.
Yeah.
Here we're just talking in statements a lot because it's a podcast. But I think if you're just generally talking with somebody and if all of your things are just statements rather than questions, then I think something's wrong probably.
Yeah.
Right? I think like the more questions somebody asks, the smarter he is, I think, essentially.
And more emphatic, I think.
Yeah, I think empathy plays some role in it, and it's also just curiosity. I think curiosity is really important character trait, or whatever you want to call it, no matter what you're doing. But that's also kind of, to go back to the topic of books, there's also kind of the reason why recently I've been trying to buy some more books that are out of kind of the business bubble.
Yeah.
Because the more of these business books you read, the more you realize that a lot of it is just the same thing.
It's the same stuff.
So just trying to kind of expand the horizon.
What are you reading right now that's not business?
I read The Animal Farm yesterday, so that's really short and it's a really old book. And I think I was supposed to read it in high school, but I never read it. And it's kind of a good look at kind of the working class versus the higher class and the struggles between those. And the other thing that I have on my desk right now, it's called Exactly, and I think it's like a history of so to read it from the cover, it's how precision engineers created the modern world, and from the back of the cover, however, when did precision begin to transform the world? Who invented and perfected it? Can the precise and the natural coexist in society? So I think it's look at like the different kind of precision work that we've done over the last few decades.
Mm-hmm.
And it's got like a bolt on the cover, and I think the bolt on the cover is kind of a good metaphor for, like, if you look at different things in life, it's fascinating how complex even the simplest things are, right? Like whatever you get your newspaper every day and you think that's simple, but how many people had to work to get the newspaper to your door? Or like you brush your teeth with a toothbrush, and it's something you just go to the store and you can buy in any store. But like how many people had to work to actually get the toothbrush done, to get all the raw materials necessary for that and things like that? Or I'm working with I'm helping a consulting company that's trying to start up here in Japan, and it's about energy industry, about the power industry, and it's just fascinating how much stuff there is to know about, like something like the electrical grid, right? It's like you take it for granted that the power comes to your outlet and then you plug your computer in and it just works. But like once you start peeling off the layers, then I think that's where it gets fascinating. And I think that's where just admitting that you don't know as much as you might think you know can be really exciting because you get to learn about all these different things. The closer something is to something that you really think you know, the easier it is to kind of make comments on it. Whereas like if you've been in marketing your whole life and then you go into a meat factory, then it's really easy to be curious, right? Because it's just so different from what you're used to doing. But if you've been in marketing your whole life and then you go into like PR, then it's easy to think that you know, just because it's so closely related to what you've been doing, right? So I guess to kind of I guess the point I'm trying to make is that, like you're saying, I think just being self-aware and really knowing where your competence ends and where you should be the learner rather than the teacher or the person that thinks that knows, it's really difficult, but it's really important. So how about going back to the books? How about you? What have you been reading?
I guess I've not been reading business books lately. I have two. Well, I have one that I just finished that I was rereading. It's called The Warrior Within. It's a book on Bruce Lee by John Little. And the next one that I'm starting up is The Tao of Pooh that we talked about last time.
Yeah, I got that one. I just started reading it today too.
Okay.
So how about the Bruce Lee books? Any interesting things in there?
There's a lot. Like, it's funny. I read this book, I think, many years back, and I still have it. And it's interesting to see how exactly your perspective changes when you come back to an old piece of work and read it. Because I guess when I was younger, I was more interested in like reading about the greats and essentially how they achieved or dominated or beat down their goals and achieved stuff. You know, like kind of the young side of you. It's like, yeah, get this done. Whereas I guess a slightly older me is taking a look at it and is a little more appreciative of the philosophy that he went through. The philosophy kind of makes sense now. For example, if you tell a person, be like water, they'll be like, I have no idea what you mean. It sounds wise. And
be like
water.
Like water. So what does that mean?
Well, think about water. It's water is essentially, if you strike it, it gets hard, right? If you gently put your hand in, it's soft. Water can fill a container in any shape or form. Like if you pour water into a cup or pour water into a vase, whichever it is, it'll assume the form. So water kind of embodies a lot of, I guess, Taoist or the philosophies that Bruce Lee also was teaching. Was like water embodies it. It's both yin and yang. It's both hard and soft. Changes based on the situation.
That's interesting. Yeah.
So, and I kind of like the way to approach life is, in tough times, it may be better to be soft than hard. And then another example is like, there's between being you probably understand this, between being in a old oak that won't bend to a flexible young bamboo that will bend under the pressure of snow. One of these things breaks. The other one bends with adversity, meaning accepts adversity as it is and is able to move on. I guess what I'm taking away from it is we talked about Taoism before, and I mentioned it, like how it's kind of hard to define it. And the whole point is you're never supposed to define it because, and I can kind of sense this in the case of my gym. It's like if they ask Yuriy, how are you so motivated and committed to go? I don't have a scientific answer for them. It's I can't even explain it myself. The easiest kind of explanation I can give is like, well, that's just me. That's what I do. So there's a lot to take away from there.
That's interesting. Yeah. So what do you think about? Because when you said be like water.
Yeah.
I think it's one of those things that's really easy to say, but then again, it comes down to how do you embody it, how do you implement it, how do you actually be like water rather than just saying that you should be like water. Where do you think is kind of the line between like an actionable advice that can be really implemented and between something that's just like an empty piece of advice that you go like, oh yeah, that makes sense, but then you are like, okay, now what?
Yeah. The hard part of like reading philosophy books is that essentially what you're getting thoughts and text on paper, whereas what he taught to his students, they practice it through martial arts. So I could tell you be like water and you'll be like, I have no idea what that means. But in the case of, I don't know, let's say you you get into an argument with someone and they press hard. They're the ones that are yelling at you. If you look at it from the yin yang perspective, there's yin yang is the opposites that bring everything together, but they're opposites of a whole. It's not two separate things. So if someone's being hard on you, it's very easy to react and be like, oh, I'm going to be hard back. I'm going to start yelling at them back. What you do is you embody the opposite and you go soft. And the easiest example I can have of this is like, there was a friend, he and I were out in Roppongi. For some reason, he decided to get into an argument with the guy at the door. But the guy at the door was like smooth as all hell. Like my friend's pissed off yelling at him. Like, I don't know, something about the prices. And the guy at the door is just like smiling and has a smooth answer for everything. Like my friend's getting more and more pissed off, but like I'm kind of I'm like in awe. I'm watching this interaction go down. And I forget what the last line was, but like I was so impressed by the guy handling himself so well. Like he diffused my friend going off. Not that my friend was going to do anything, but I think that's a great example of like adjusting to the circumstance. I don't know if that completely answers your question to the point of like being like water, but it's a great example of like how you can be flexible in a tough time. I think you also had a really good example of yours with the Google algorithm change. Like there's a point in time when you feel sad about something, but you accept the situation for what it is and you keep on flowing and you get back up and you make a plan based on the current reality of things.
Yeah. I think those are really good examples for the water thing. But I guess the reason I was asking is because I spend more time on Twitter nowadays than I used to in the past. And in the past it was zero. Now it's just a little. But like I see all these accounts tweeting like really smart sounding things, and then I read it and I'm like, okay, that makes sense. And then like a second later, I either forget it or I'm like, okay, so what next?
Yeah.
Like let me give you an example. It's like, to build a business, build an audience first, right? Let's say there's a tweet that sounds really smart and that's definitely true. But like what value does it give to someone? I guess that's my.
Well, yeah.
Where does the value come from?
The problem is like all of those quotes, and why for the most part I am not a fan of quotes is that it's like a 30-second, 10-second soundbite. It's taken from someone who understands the concept, who's lived the concept, who's practiced it, and it's given to the listener who has no idea of it, and they're given something that sounds impressive, but to them they're never going to kind of get it. It's like, the whole Steve Jobs stay hungry, stay foolish. It's like, oh, that sounds great, yeah, but how do you internalize that? You can't, because that's Steve Jobs' kind of conclusion of his work and his pretty much the summation of his life.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think you sent me that Richard Feynman video about how he talks about how difficult the question why is. Yeah. And it just comes down to that, I guess, right? At the end of the day, it's like,
well, it's
like if yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to go on. I think the Richard Feynman example is a great example.
Yeah, so it's like if somebody asks me, oh, how do you build a website that will make you money? Then you go, oh, it's easy. You just publish good content.
Yeah.
But that's really just from the point of view of somebody that already knows all the context surrounding it, right? It's like you just publish good content. If you tell it to my mom or if you tell it to somebody who's never built a blog or anything, then they go like, okay, so what is a good content? Or how often should I publish? Or how do I publish? Or what topic should I write about? And then you go into like, what topic should you write about? So write about topics that people search on Google and that there are not enough answers for. And then you go, how do I do that? And then you go, okay, let's do keyword research and find topics that have whatever expected search volume of 40 visits a month or something. And then you go, how do I do that? So it's like every single quote that sounds smart, there's just so much more hidden behind it that unless it's explained, the quote itself is worthless. Yeah. I think that I think it really makes the medium of Twitter really hard to convey value through. And I think the tweet storms and things like that they do nowadays with like longer threads, I think those can sometimes be good, but yeah, I think it's just so hard to convey any sort of thing through a simple quote.
It's really like the tip of the iceberg. That's what a quote is like. It's a tip of the iceberg, but it in no way can help you understand it unless you've actually been through what the kind of the person or the speaker is saying. So to give you a bit of more context, I have the book open. Lee observed that water was so malleable that it was impossible to grasp a handful of it, that when struck, it was impossible to hurt, It was at once both pure yin by virtue of the fact that it remained one of the softest, most yielding substances in the world, and pure yang in that it was also capable of penetrating the hardest forms of matter. It could be calm, like the still surface of a pond, or turbulent and violent, like Niagara Falls. The nature of water, then, is to adapt itself instantly to any obstacle in its path, and by moving at its own pace, begin a natural process of surmounting it. In other words, the lesson to be learned from water is that if we can learn to flow with adversity, we will eventually overcome it. In addition, it is only through our flowing with life that we are able to adapt and grow. Indeed, life is movement, with the result that if we cease to flow with it, it passes us by. As Bruce Lee said, running water never grows stale, so you've got to just keep on flowing. The nature of water, Bruce Lee held, also revealed the philosophic corollary of yin-yang, that of the necessity of bending with adversity.
Yeah, I think it's good. I think especially the bending with adversity, and you were talking about the bamboo earlier, and like rather than being broken, I think that's really important, right? And again, that goes back to kind of like if you get hit by a Google algorithm, traffic drop, then it's like what can you do? You can just kind of bounce back and just keep going.
Yeah.
Or you can give up like the oak and stop doing things.
Well, there were a few more that I really liked. Lee developed his own martial arts called Jeet Kune Do, but he never wanted that style to become a style, because the moment you are able to put a label on it is the moment that it becomes boxed in. And the whole point of his philosophy was you take what's useful and you throw out what's not. So in the case of martial arts, if a boxer goes up against a wrestler and they both end up on the ground, the boxer who was trained all his life in one style is going to lose instantly because the wrestler knows what he's doing. This kind of thinking ended up influencing what we have now with MMA, mixed martial arts, where fighters train in multiple styles. So you adjust based on the kind of situation that you're placed in. I also found this pretty fascinating, but I was also thinking about it from the political and economic point of view. For example, if you spend enough time on Twitter, you'll probably see some arguments, capitalism versus socialism and blah, blah, blah. And it kind of ties back into, well, these are all just kind of labels. And maybe some work in one fashion, but they don't work in another fashion, or they're damaging in other times. So why can't we just, maybe I shouldn't put it so simply, but it seems to me like it kind of makes sense if you approach, let's say, economics with that similar point. Some things should be better privatized, some things should not be, and find a way to make both exist.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there in everything there's a scale and there's a balance, right? But the thing is, once you start, and I couldn't agree with the quote more, but I think once you start labeling things, then it always becomes label A versus label B, rather than like what's the best thing, right? People just get emotional about things. But I think the other thing that I found interesting about what you're just saying, and especially about like once you label somebody something, then or something and give it a name, then whatever is not that will kind of be excluded. And I think we see a lot of that in like today's society and in business too, and wherever. It's like people just like once something gets a label, it just becomes so much less. Well, I guess to use the water analogy, it just becomes so less fluid, and it just becomes this well-defined thing, and whatever doesn't fit in that definition is automatically out, even if it makes sense for it to be in, right? Like, let's say if times change, like you have some law that was passed, let's say 40 years ago, but since then the times have completely changed. But because that law is still in place, and that law was passed by this party or that party, then that party won't be willing to change that law because it was passed by them a long time ago, and things like that. I think that's what really causes a lot of trouble nowadays.
Yeah, that's a great point.
But the other thing is, I think more on kind of the personal and business / career or whatever level. I think that what you mentioned about the MMA, the mixed martial arts, was really interesting, because I think it's almost like a difference between being an employee and being an entrepreneur, or even between like what a career was like 40 years ago versus what it is now. I would even argue it's like if you want to build like a solid corporate career, then it's probably good to specialize in like one thing. and one thing only.
Hmm.
Whereas like if you want to be an entrepreneur, you don't have to be the best boxer, or you don't have to be the best karate fighter or the best aikido fighter or whatever, but you have to know a decent chunk of each so that you can kind of play all the different roles and you can adjust and you can solve different problems, right?
Yeah. When we read these books, it's hard to apply because we're not probably being taught directly by Bruce Lee, and the way he taught these principles was to his students directly through martial arts. How do you practice being like water in a fight? I think becomes a lot more tangible than us reading it out of a book. But I think the kind of advice also holds true. There's another point I wanted to bring up was like the point of mindlessness or no mind. I wouldn't say mindlessness. It's rather no mind was another powerful point in the sense of, if you're going up against, let's say it's a fight, right? If you're ever too fixated, if you become too fixated on something with the opponent, like you're watching his legs, but you're not watching his hands, you're going to get hit by the hands. And to bring that all back is more so instead of arresting your thoughts or your attention on one thing, you should have like a overall awareness of what's going on. So that way you're not overthinking over one thing, and you're able to react instantly without overthinking it. For example, we also kind of learned this in improv class that I take. There's a lot of being in the now exercises that are, it's very hard to tell someone you have to be in the now, but there are ways to practice it. And I think that's where the skill of developing no mind is very powerful. I think it can kind of help with like motivation and everything, because in my own, from examining myself, the times that I am able to achieve a lot is when, in a way, I'm not bogged down mentally by other things. And for example, if I'm stressed out, if I'm thinking about this or that, then there's no chance in hell that I'll get anything done. So I think is a very valuable principle. Again, this is one of these things that you really need a channel for practicing it. Otherwise, it's just like it's like a puffy quote that sounds nice and it sounds like something you should do, like doing crunches to have 6-pack abs. So I guess, yeah. So it's like this needs practicing, and we practice it a lot in improv acting. But how do you tell a person to be in the now is like it's a hard thing to grasp, because it's not something that should be done intellectually. It's something that's done experientially. I think that's the whole point of all those martial arts movies, kind of having the teacher whack the student, because as soon as you get hit with that whack, you're now brought into the present. So your mind is not wandering around like, what should I have for dinner tonight, or my back really hurts.
So did we like focus? Or?
Yeah, it's not so much focus; it's just a general awareness of what's going on without arresting your thoughts onto one thing. Kind of like if you're ever in the zone, like if you're ever playing a game, or if you're playing sports, you kind of have an awareness of where everyone is. Like for example, take basketball. You have an awareness of where everyone is on the court right now as you're dribbling the ball, and you do multiple things at once. You're aware of where your the opposing team is, who's defending you. You're aware where your teammates are, and you kind of have this like overall awareness, but you're not too focused on one thing. So that way you can easily carry out whatever else you need to do. Either you take the shot or you pass it. But if you get too caught up in like, I really want to take this shot, you're probably going to screw up.
Yeah, absolutely agree with it. I guess it's kind of like in business, if you're just focused on your product rather than what's happening around you in the market, then you're almost destined to fail.
Yeah.
That sort of thing, right? Yeah.
In improv acting, we're taught this in many ways. We start off with like games. For example, there's one like just announcing everyone's name, going in a circle. No point of that is to take your mind off of whatever that you wanted to do to like being in a moment. And what is the moment now? The point of the moment is to recite people's names. So that way you are in tune. You're not being bogged down by, I really want to say this, or I want to try this joke when I get up there. The next thing is that we also have this exercise where you're wandering around, like the whole class of people, let's say 10 to 12 in one room, and you're wandering around like in whichever direction you choose. And your goal is not to bump into other people, but simply be aware of where they are and where you are, and without actually staring at anyone. So that way, it's another way, like you're kind of practicing awareness. You know that there's a person to your left and to your right and behind you, but you're still kind of walking into your own direction, then you're turning. And finally, before we get up to do a scene, it's told that, if you thought of something funny that you want to do, by that essence alone, you're already going to mess up because you're trying to plan something. If you try to plan something, that's no longer improv. That's like you trying to be funny. And real improv kind of happens on the spot.
So essentially, it's like, don't try too hard. Let things flow naturally.
Yeah. And it makes a lot of sense when you're practicing it. Like you can easily start sensing it when either you're doing improv or you're playing sports, but talking about it is just, it's hard because I think it's really an experiential process, not something that can be attained just by talking about it. But I think every one of us has experienced it at one point or another.
Yeah, that's interesting because, I think it's very easy to just get fixated on something, or to, like you said, to be like when you're doing something, it's so easy to have something that you want to do in your mind and just lose track of what's happening and then just completely put something out of context. I guess just learning to be present in the moment, it's really important.
But it's very hard because, we're all thinkers in our, at least in my case, my mind's racing a mile a minute sometimes. And so the Bruce Lee book I just finished, kind of want to go through it again. And after that, I have the Tao of Pooh that also kind of started. I think I went one chapter in. I think you're also reading it too now, right?
I just started reading it this morning, and I didn't get far yet, but it seems like a fun read. I mean, Pooh's an adorable character. So,
any takeaways just yet?
No, I think in the beginning it mentioned like a quote from, I guess it's from the Tao, but it's like to begin a 1,000-mile journey, you have to take the first step, or something along those lines. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really true for everything. And it goes back to kind of just what we were talking about in terms of quotes being meaningless without the context or anything. But at the same time, I think, like, if you really think about it, then that's what you got to do at the very essence of it, right? Like, to go back to Warren Buffett or whatever, like to get to the point where he is now with $67.5 billion and number 4 richest in the world, he just had to take the very first step, which was maybe like getting his first paper out, or maybe it was buying his first pinball machine, or whatever that first step was. It was the first step on a journey that eventually led him to like $67.5 billion. So I think, like in that sense, to me, the takeaway from that quote is just, one, just do things. But two, I think, like, don't be too good for things, I guess. Is that a way you could say it? Like don't be like, oh, this is just $50, or don't be just, oh, this is just $100, because those $100 are one step on the way for you to get to the next level, essentially.
I think you will like this book, and anyone listening to this, you guys will definitely like this book. It also, I think, espouses a lot of what the Bruce Lee book was talking about. He did borrow a bit from Taoism. It made me think back to one goal that I set in the past, which was to pay off my student loans. And this was, the reason why I think of it is because this is the one goal that I set, but I wasn't mentally fixated upon. And it just happened. And that's something I kind of want to replicate again, because, my goal was to pay $256 a month, to earn $256 a month, so I could receive that money. I could send it to my bank. So by the time the direct deposit would take out money, that money already be in there. So I would not have to worry about paying student loans. And I hit that goal, but I don't remember being like crazy fanatical. Like, all right, these are my steps. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. I don't remember being crazy and fanatical or analytical about it or the planning process. I think it was quite simple. And it just...
So here we're talking about your side hustle, right?
What?
Have you kind of...
No, but it's going into paying the student loans.
Yeah, but the $256, is that something that you were meant to make from side hustles, or just in general kind of set $256 aside?
Yeah, I just put in the work. I was not exactly too fixated in when I will reach it, or how fast, or when will I get it done, or what are the 100 steps that I need to do. I just kind of went along and did it. And I think it goes back to that whole concept of no mind is like the moment you kind of detach your ego and you detach yourself from when it comes, it becomes a lot more easier to get it done.
That's interesting because it kind of goes exactly the opposite of what I would have sort of thought on this topic, because I kind of believe that what gets measured gets managed, or there's some alternative versions to say that. But did you not do any tracking at all, and you just were like, okay, I'll just do $256 a month and have them withdraw it from my account automatically, and I won't even think about it, sort of approach? Or
it was, well, at that time I think I was making like 150 to $100 a month. So my first goal was like, all right, I need to hit 256 so I could just deposit that and no longer worry about making the payments. So I mean, I was aware of the numbers. I was aware of how far I needed to go, but I wasn't in the pumped, hell yeah, let's get it done. Let me analyze all the articles that I need to put out this month to try and reach this goal. How many articles do I need? Maybe 100, maybe 200. Let me do the math and plan it out. So there was none of that. Like I was aware of the numbers, but I didn't get too analytical into like all the work that I need to do. I knew it was going to happen
so
at
you
one
just
point.
did it.
Yeah, I knew it was going to happen at one point. I knew it was going to be a reality.
Kind of on an autopilot, I guess, in a way.
Yeah. And to that extent, like it made it very easy to achieve it. And overall, paying off the student loans in general was another goal that I had set that I wasn't exactly too mindful about.
Would you say it's better to be, what's the term used? No mind?
No mind.
So would you say it's always better to be, quote unquote, with no mind when you're doing something the first time around, but be a bit more calculating or more planning the second time around? So to give you an example, like the first blog that I ever built, which is my to any sort of like what could be considered success in one way or another, was my aviation blog. And when I built that, I had no idea what I was doing. I was just doing it. But whereas after that, the blogs that I started, there was always the intention of building it in some way or getting to some point and things like that. So I guess my question was, do you think it's better for when you're doing something the first time around, when you're just discovering something, to just do it and kind of learn from your mistakes and just kind of go with the flow, versus once you figure out what the path was the first time, then just take that path and try to replicate it and do it a bit more mindfully, I guess would be it.
I think mindfully, yeah, but just because you say no mind doesn't mean you're literally doing things without analyzing and reviewing. I guess it's more of are you checking Google Analytics every 10 minutes to see what your stats are? Because that's not going to help anything.
Yeah.
Are you rereading the article you published and despairing over the typos that you possibly made? Are you looking at your deadline and worrying, all right, I have this self-imposed goal that I want to hit within 3 months. Maybe I won't reach it, and kind of getting upset over that? I think there's always going to be mind, right? Like there's always steps that require a bit of planning, but it's the extra over analytical mind that is not helpful. It's like when you become too fixated on one thing instead of the overall perspective is when you start overthinking, and it's when it starts becoming less enjoyable and adding more stress to it. So I think not by no mind, it's like not that you're completely doing things mindlessly, that you're trying it on the first shot and then once you have a path, you follow that path. I mean, like that's like a general practice, right?
Yeah.
That makes sense. If that works, then you do it. It's just how much of it are you going to get bogged down by? At some point, you kind of have to trust the process and step back, and otherwise, you either drive yourself crazy checking analytics, wondering when your website will reach over 1,000 users a day, or you just put in the work and let it be and kind of trust that if you check in within 2 weeks, maybe you'll have a better result.
Yeah, at some point you have to trust your process. I think that's a great point, and I think it kind of ties back all the way back to the compounding. Like whatever the great things that you want to do are, like chances are they're not a thing that you can finish in a day, right? And if that's the case, then at the end of the day, what it comes down to is, like you just said, believing that what you're doing is getting you closer to the goal, or to whatever it is that you're trying to achieve, even if in that moment it doesn't seem so. And I think building a blog is like a great example of that, because you just got to keep writing or keep paying money for content or whatever, and just keep publishing it for months before you see any visitor to your site, and not even before making your first dollar from the site. And probably like long-term investing for retirement is a thing like that as well, right? And yeah, I think from that point of view, now I kind of get what you're trying to say, and I think it's really important to really trust the process rather than just be obsessed over the results.
Yeah, or specifically obsessed with one particular thing, whether it's the deadline that you need to hit by yourself, or it's the certain, I don't know, view count that you want your site to hit, or a certain dollar figure that you want to earn. I mean, the fact is that there's also the possibility that it might not come as soon as you expected it, and that's also something that you got to let go of.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think it comes down to like some things are under your control and some things aren't.
Yeah.
Like we were talking earlier about the Ovarian lottery and things like that. But even on kind of the micro level, like when I set myself goals, or when I say myself I'm gonna do this or gonna do that, usually I try to formulate it in terms of inputs rather than outputs, because I think the outputs can always vary, right? Like you can publish 100 articles, and one side will go to 5,000 page views, the other side will go to 500, and another one might strike it lucky and go to 100,000. But that's in your control only until a certain point, right? So rather than setting myself a goal of like, oh, I'm gonna hit 5,000 page views by this time or something, I just like to keep the goals limited to the input. So whatever's under my control, like I'm gonna hire a writer and I'm gonna publish 5 articles a week, regardless of how many traffic those articles are going to bring, right? Because I think those things are under your control, and I think having at least some sort of plan for those is always good, I would say.
Yeah. I think another way to phrase it would be excessive self-consciousness, right? When you're too attached and you're too analytical over everything, that you can no longer enjoy the process, or you can no longer just let things be because you're either worried about hitting that goal or earning that money or getting the page count.
Excessive consciousness. Yeah, I think so. I think
you might notice it, like with, like, for example, with some, people that if you know the people that think a little too much about certain things that aren't worth much analysis. I know I'm a big overthinker, and to that extent, like, reading about this stuff helps me not think about these things as much. But usually it's like, essentially it's getting bogged down with overthinking is what it is. The whole no mind.
Yeah, I think so. I know a lot of people that just, I think one thing is to overthink things, and the other thing that I think a lot of people tend to do is just dive into the details before figuring out the high level, kind of.
Yeah.
And that might be similar to what you're trying to say there. But let's say like, let's say I'm going to start a new site, and I'm like, oh my god, what do I do? Like, if I start a site on Bluehost now, then I'm screwed, because once the site reaches 200,000 visitors a month, it's gonna crash. And when people say things like that, I just go like, hey, slow down and first get to your first 1,000 visitors on Bluehost, and then think about migrating the site or something. But like, don't put the what is the saying? Don't put the cart ahead of the horse.
Yeah. Essentially, you're seeing all the problems that could pop up 10 miles down the road, and you're not even past the first mile.
Yeah, exactly. And at the end of the day, just an excuse not to take that first step, I think. It's like, oh, but if I do it this way, then it's going to get screwed up when I hit this point. Or if I do it that way, then I'm going to be fine for the first month, but then it's going to get screwed up. And it's like, whatever, just do it and then figure it out along the way. Yeah.
So I'm guilty of this also, like on the side of relationships. I would not get into them because I would think like, I would start imagining all the bad stuff that would happen 10 miles or 20 miles down the road. And as a result, I would just not do it. So that kind of thinking impacted me in the past. But it's you just coming up with reasons to say no, or just, it's you putting, again, like you said, putting the cart ahead of the horse, and without actually experiencing anything. And at that point, you're not living in the now, because right now is what's the situation at hand. You're kind of mentally putting yourself into the future that has not happened yet. And also,
Yeah,
this kind of goes back to the importance of being in a now, right? The whole point of being no mind is that you can't enjoy the now or make the best decision in the now if your mind is like 20 years down the road. I mean, maybe you should balance it. Like you should be able to plan ahead, but the whole point is you should also be able to make a wise judgment as to what's happening right now.
Yeah, I think the balance is important, because then again, you can have these people that quote unquote live in the now, and they spend all their money and they just have a lot of fun now, and then like they reach 65 and they're like, okay, what am I gonna do now? I have no money, I have no savings, I have nothing. So I think it's definitely a balance, but I think to me the now that you're sort of talking about is more about taking action rather than not planning for the future. It's like it just not getting paralyzed by like analyzing things and
Exactly.
overthinking things.
I mean, you could plan for the future if listen, you can be like, all right, I'm going to spend these next 5 minutes to plan what I want to do within the next 5 years. I mean, technically you're still living in a now because you're making the best use of your time. When you're not living in a now is when you're in a situation, let's say again, you're starting a website and right now all you're thinking is, oh, I'm going to have these problems if I start. At that point, you're not living in a now.
You're just living a hypothetical scenario where
exactly. I mean, planning is fine. Planning is normal. It just, my one qualm with talking about this is because it can be easily written off as some like self-help, not psychological, but self-help like woo-woo that it's very hard to grasp. That it sounds like magic in a way. It's like, yeah, live in it now, but it's very much real. Like in any concept that we do. Like I see it in dance, I see it in improv, I see it in fighting, I see it, just in terms of getting work done. Like if your mind is elsewhere and you're not writing that article, then guess you're not living in it now. Like the whole point is like people easily write it off, but it's very applicable.
So would you say it could be simplified to like do what moves the needle, or is it slightly off?
I think that's a separate kind of question to ask. It's like more of a choice of what the person wants to do. Like you can take the living in now as in like, oh, what do I want to do right now? Surely I want to eat some candy and watch Netflix and watch ice cream and then suffer weight gain 2 weeks later. Maybe some people enjoy that in a now, but I would say you're kind of like caricaturing it to like everyone wants candy in the easy way right now, which is not particularly true. Being in a now is being able to respond to the now without getting bogged down with like the details of what's going to happen or what you want to do.
So then it's like Pooh sticking his head into the tree without thinking about the fact that bees are going to be chasing him once he takes his head out.
Well, that's one way to put it. As to how, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing is another discussion. I actually want to bring improv into this because improv is like a great practice of being in a now. And you can easily tell who is able to be in a now. I hate saying it so much because it sounds terrible, but based on the conversations that people have, in improv, it's all about listening to the offer of what someone else has given you. And your job as an improv actor is to accept that offer and build off of it. And you can easily tell a bad improv actor when they ignore everything that the person says and they kind of want to push their own agenda. It's like, for example, you say conversations like catchball. So at that point, it's not catchball. It's just like, I throw the ball at you. You're like, you catch it, you drop it, and you throw a football back at me. Like, wait, enough of your tennis ball. Let's talk about my football type of thing. And you can, if you take that concept, the whole listening, and you just go into everyday life and you watch, like, for example, at a dinner party, you listen to people talk, you can easily start seeing balls getting dropped. Like someone's just completely going to ignore what the other person said and they want to push their own stuff. I think it's very easy for an improviser to see that. And it's at that point, you can quite easily note that this person is not really accepting the present and they're trying to push their own agenda. And then ultimately, from the improv standpoint, that's going to be a bad scene. In a real life standpoint, what happens is like the other person kind of feels unappreciated. They're not being listened to, and that conversation is not going to go anywhere. One great example that I heard from my teacher well, not that I heard, but I experienced. Like I was listening to this when we were all at dinner. Was someone brought up sports? It's like, oh hey, by the way, do you watch so and so team? And I thought it was
Yeah.
great because I don't watch sports at all. I was not raised on sports. And in the past, when someone would bring up sports to me, I would be like, oh, I don't watch at all. Like, I'm sorry. But if you step back and a person says, hey, oh, by the way, did you watch the game last night? What are they trying to do? Ultimately, all they're trying to do is they're trying to establish a line of communication or contact with you. They just want to start talking with you. And they're only doing it, they're doing it through the few ways that they know how. And they're doing it through something that they like. But ultimately, it's not about whether you like or hate sports. They want to establish contact with you. And by rejecting that offer in improv, you reject that offer. You say, oh, I don't watch sports. You kind of kill the conversation. The other person feels a little uncomfortable and you feel like, oh, well, I'm just not that type of person. What my teacher did was, I was watching this as it unfolded. He was like, oh, no, I don't watch sports, but my mom really loves this team, blah, blah, blah. And suddenly the conversation blossomed, right? And
Yeah, I think so.
and I was blown away because I know in my position I would be like, oh, I don't watch sports, I don't care.
Yeah, and I think there's also where curiosity comes in. It's like, oh, I don't watch sports, but how was the result, or like how was the game, or what's your favorite team, or it just, I think being curious better about the other person or just better about the topic in general.
Yeah.
I think that's what can kind of keep the thing going.
But you have to be kind of listening and accepting to what the other person says.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think listening and accepting what the other person says is, in many ways, it's the same as being curious, right? Because if you're curious, you just want to continue listening and you want to know, and you want to just continue talking about whatever the person has to say. Versus if you're not curious, then you just want to switch back to whatever it is that you're most comfortable with right away. I'd say to a large extent. I think it's not 100% parallel, but I think there's a lot of parallels between the two.
Yeah. But I think that's a very good example of just like how you can be in the present moment. And that's to listen and accept the person's offer and respond.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. Listen and accept the other person's offer, whatever it is, and play along with that.
Yeah. And ultimately in improv, what that results is results in a great scene. In real life, it results in the other person feeling like they've been listened to and that they made a good connection with the other person.
Yeah, definitely.
My whole point was like, I wanted to take the whole concept of being in the now. Like there's so many ways you can apply this, but it doesn't mean like, oh, I want to eat candy right now or I want to do something stupid right now. It's more about being in a present moment and responding to what reality is giving you right now.
Yeah, just being aware of what's going on and of the surroundings.
Yeah. And if you're too mentally attached to something, like, you know, like the whole point of no mind is like, if you want to talk about something else and you're going to butt that topic in anyway, then it's not exactly you being aware. And it's just like, you're still, you're going against the flow of how things are going just to press in your topic. So to that extent, yeah, I hope I made it clear. I wasn't sure. Like it's a very deep topic.
Yeah, I think so, and I think you gave a lot of great examples. I think it's certainly much clearer to me than it was like 15 minutes ago, and I'm sure for the listeners as well. So how about we close this episode with just a bit of reflection on what we want to do next month, and
Okay.
any sort of minor goals, larger goals that we might want to
All right. So
achieve or at least aim for, if nothing else.
So what kind of goals do you want to set for next month?
That's a good question. Unlike with the last episode, I haven't actually thought this through yet. So, but I definitely want to launch the second site that I'm kind of working on right now, working on launching it. And to do that, I just got to continue ordering articles and actually edit them and publish them, because that's part of the bottleneck too right now. And just continue growing the site that I'm mainly growing right now, the site that I'm focusing on a lot. And that site's been doing great. That site's been growing every month for the last few months. And but at the end of the day, I guess I just want to continue to figure out how to just I had this thought the other day. I'm just like, the more I can fire myself from whatever it is that I'm doing, like the better I can do, I think. So my new goal, just kind of an ongoing goal, is to just keep firing myself from whatever task that it is that I'm doing, and just have somebody else do them. Because I really think that's the only way to grow, and it's probably the best way to build a business at the end of the day.
What tasks?
So my next
Go ahead.
so my next target in terms of that is probably outsourcing editing of the articles, because right now I get them from the writer, and my virtual assistant puts them into the WordPress and formats them nicely and things like that. But then it's still me that goes there and reads it and fixes typos and like moves things around and things like that when necessary. So I guess the next step would be to hire somebody that will actually do the editing for me,
Mm-hmm.
so that I don't have to do that anymore.
Editing is hard. Yeah.
So my main goal for next month or even the month after is to fire myself as the editor and get somebody else to do that job.
Okay.
And then just got to figure out what's the next job that I'm going to get myself fired out of.
Anything on like, what about the type of content that you want to put out, or it's just going to be continued? You're going to continue more articles?
You mean like videos versus articles versus podcasts or whatever? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah. So mainly articles for now. I was thinking of trying to do some videos for the site that I'm growing right now, but I probably won't be doing that for a while. Just not a focus right now. But then, I'm thinking of trying to start a personal YouTube channel to talk about some of the things similar to what we're talking about here.
Mm-hmm.
But that's more of a second half of this year rather than next month sort of goal.
Yeah. All right, that sounds good.
So how about you, Lenny? You had some time to think about your goals while I was talking.
No, I guess considering I failed gloriously on the goals I set last month, I definitely like things on the definitely want to do is that video. I want to get that done. I'm going to bring the product articles. I know last time I promised like 15. I'm going to bring it down to say 5 just to keep it realistic. I'm going to take out email opt-in bonus for now. One thing I forgot to mention was like, I also did a podcast for my personal blog. Like I wanted to play around and record one episode of basically an audio version of the article that I wrote up last time. And I did that last time. It just wasn't in my goals, but it's something that I ended up doing. Not sure if unless I get like a really good topic, I don't know if I want to do it again, but I wanted to bring it up. That's like another output that I did last time.
Yeah, I think that's really cool with the podcast that you're doing, because after seeing that, I kind of wanted to do it myself too, and that's sort of what also led me to like the YouTube idea. It's like I have some of these blog posts which I think are decent, so I'm thinking of turning those into videos and just getting better at kind of reusing content in general, because it's a real waste to write one article and then have that just be it essentially. Like you can turn a single article into podcast, into video, into like tweets and things like that. So I really want to get better at reusing content on kind of the personal side.
Yeah, and if anything, it'll kind of extend your reach, and you can reuse that content elsewhere to bring traffic back.
Yeah, exactly. I think originality is overrated to a large extent, because like you put an article out once and then you share it once on Facebook or whatever, but still probably like 70% of your audience doesn't see it. So there's no reason not to reshare it or share it in different form and things like that.
Yeah. And there are different angles, different quotes that you can like take. For example, I think with the Joe Rogan podcast, they take clips out of that, like 5-minute, 3-minute clips of actual 2-hour, 3-hour interviews. And they post those up, and like those get a lot of I think it seems like those get more watches than actual interviews themselves. But ultimately what they do is they drive his brand and bring viewers back to the original podcast.
Yeah, and then they probably also get more watches because people just want they want just the summarized information at the end of the day.
Yeah,
kind of just the tweet. and I think that's what a lot of people want. And I don't think it's the best necessarily always, but
It's a terrible.
if it's something that leads you to, if it's something that leads you to then actually going deeper into a topic, then I think it's good.
Yeah. It's like top of the funnel, gets you deeper into the funnel.
Exactly. If it serves like a trailer rather than just taking that one quote as the movie, then I think it's good. But if you take a quote and you read a quote and you think you know everything about the topic just because you read that to build a business you need to build an audience
Oh yeah.
or something, then you're screwed.
Yeah. All right. So we've set our goals. I think you have more of a process type of goal than actual output.
Yeah, I think the output is the process. Like, especially in terms of the side hustles, I just try to think of as it's just building a system rather than doing the work.
Yeah.
Because maybe I'm lazy, or maybe that's just the way to.
No, I think
to kind of not work in the business, but on the business, so to say.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I will I'll sit down and get those things knocked out. The video stuff is something I really want to do because it's been bothering me. If I said it here, it's gonna happen.
Hopefully, we'll definitely catch back on these goals and things again next month.
I hope we were not rambling too much. This was more of a freestyle type of conversation podcast, episode 9. If you want the notes for this, be sure to visit sidehustlesandstuff.com/E9. We'll list down all the books that we talked about, all the fun quotes that are. Remember, don't trust quotes. Always get the full story. And anything else that we want to leave them with today?
No, just treat quotes as trailers, not as the movie. Would be, I guess, my closing thought. Listening to what we're just talking about.
Yeah. All right. So thank you for listening in. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts, please be sure to drop in and rate the podcast, leave us a review. If you clicked over here through Facebook or wherever, leave a comment. Let us know if you liked it. We always enjoy hearing from you. And we'll see you next time.
Next week.
All right.